بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brothers and sisters, and welcome to another session of Ask Imam, where you guys at home in the comfort of your settees and sofas can fire away questions at Imams here in the comfort of the masjid, mashallah, where we answer to the best of our ability and the way in which we feel comfortable with answering, inshallah, your questions, inshallah ta'ala. Sheikh, Imam Osama, how are you doing?
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I'm very well. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Jazakallah khair.
We don't get to see much of each other these times, just to let our brothers and sisters know that we're not actually spending a lot of time together.
Yeah. Otherwise, we would prepare for these sessions a lot better.
And the weather, Sheikh, what's going on with the...
I don't know, I kind of like the cold, Sheikh, man, if I'm honest. Yeah, I'm a fan of the cold. Although I did ask for the heating to be put on just now.
Yeah, I don't mind the cold, but I think the last few days it's been quite...
The microphone's a bit poppy. I might switch to the camera.
Oh dear. Yeah, so just got a message from the technical team that the microphone is popping a little bit. So let's see if we can change that up a little bit. Ayman, there should be another mic there, and then an adapter for the iPhone. Yeah, and then there should be an adapter for the iPhone in the bag.
In the bag?
Yeah, in the bigger bag. Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Bismillah, how's this? Still? Bismillah. Is that any better? Bismillah. Is that good? Okay. We're in business, guys. We're in business. MashaAllah. Sheikh, what were we saying? Yeah, weather. Yeah, what can you do, subhanAllah? You're not cold, man, are you, Sheikh?
No, alhamdulillah.
You're from the Saharan plains in Morocco, right?
Alhamdulillah. It does remind us of a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not a strong hadith, but its meaning is that when you are experiencing a very hot day, there is a dua, and if we translate it, it's Subhanallah, glory be to Allah, how hot is this day? And then you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the protection from hellfire, from the heat of hellfire. And then if the day is extremely cold, you ask protection from also the cold of hellfire, because we know that hellfire has different degrees. Some of the punishment of hellfire is with heat and some with cold, which is known as zamharir. Some pits of hellfire have, the torture or the punishment is with the cold. Keeping that in mind, making that dua. Rasulullah said in a hadith that when a person says, "Oh Allah, grant me paradise 3 times," then paradise itself says, "Ya Allah, grant this person entry into paradise." And when a person seeks protection from hellfire 3 times, then hellfire says, "Ya Allah, protect this servant of yours from hellfire."
Yeah. Subhanallah.
Alhamdulillah.
What an opener. What a reminder, mashallah. Okay, so let's get straight into it, Sheikh. Let's check out some of the questions that have come our way, bi'idhnillah. So the first one is, what to do? What to do, Sheikh? What should we do?
Don't do anything.
Just don't do it. If during Salah, I get stuck on a word or a verse of a surah, but I do remember what comes after it. So you get stuck on the ayah in particular, but you remember the ayah that's following, but you can't really remember how to complete the ayah that you're stuck on.
So if you can't complete the ayah, then you move on to the next ayah. There's no harm in doing that, except for obviously Surah Al-Fatiha, because you have to recite every ayah in Surah Al-Fatiha. But other than that, it's better to have sort of fluency in your recitation, and if you get stuck, then move on to the next verse, or else your attention is going to go away from the salah to just the particular words of that verse or of that surah, and it's going to confuse you. So moving on to the next verse. Sometimes going back helps. Like the Hufad doing Taraweeh, you get stuck somewhere and go back.
Well, the danger with that is you're just cycling through the same two ayahs. Until it comes to you. So if someone does that shit, that doesn't really have any effect on your salah, right? If you're stuck on an ayah and you repeat and you repeat and you repeat, it's not like that's.
Well, if you have completed your 3 verses, which is the sunnah, 3 verses or 1 long verse, then it doesn't really matter. Actually, Rasulullah is known to have spent an entire night repeating 1 verse in his salah. But you're doing it for the right reason, because you're thinking about the meanings of those of that verse or those verses, not because you're stuck that you can't move forward. But I guess you wouldn't do it in Faridah. It's mostly going to be in your Nafila. So
in Faridah, so we're going to make a differentiation here between the Nafila and the Faridah, only because the Faridah holds a little bit more importance with regards to the structure and the severity in which you hold the arkan. So you have to follow them down to a T. So yes, let's talk a little bit about that, inshallah. So we have, if someone does that in the Faridah, they shouldn't really continue, isn't it? They should sort of repeat until they're
because just because we don't have any hadith of Rasulullah repeating any particular verse. So maybe once or twice, there's no harm in it.
And if it doesn't come, then the person has a few options. Either he goes on to the next verse and continues.
And if you've read your 3 verses, or you've completed a short, well, you haven't completed the short surah, that's why you're stuck. But if you've read 3 verses, then you can even go into ruku'.
And if a person decides to recite an alternative surah entirely, so let's say he starts Surah Al-Insan, for example, and you just after the first ayah, he's like, wait a minute.
It reminded me of something. When we were studying in Darul Ulum, we were made to read salawat as the students
practicing this stuff. Right?
So a friend of mine, a colleague of my class, it was his turn to lead Fajr Salah. So for some reason, he decided to recite قُلْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ Surah Al-Jinn, and Surah Al-Jinn can get confusing, and especially in Fajr time. Right, so
you've just woken up.
So he's gone into قُلْ أُوحِيَ and he gets completely stuck, right? And everyone's quiet because nobody's giving him luqma because everybody's confused.
It's like, what are you reciting again?
And he repeats and repeats himself, and he can't get through. And our Shaykh al-Hadith, from standing right behind him, he says وَالضُّحَى like changed completely. You're in the wrong surah. So he does that. He takes the luqma, he recites وَالضُّحَى, he finishes it, and then he gets a roller kick after salah. Why pick Surah Al-Jinn for Fajr? Pick something that you know. And that actually is the moral of the story, is don't go into, because this is going to be standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why Imams have favorite passages of the Quran that they recite in Salah. You have to be comfortable because you are in conversation with Allah Azza wa Jalla, other than Ramadan where you have to do a khatm. But generally, you are encouraged to recite those verses or those surahs that you're comfortable and you know that most likely you're not going to make a mistake. Every now and then you get stuck. It's the nature of one's memory and the mutashabih and similar verses in the Quran. So these are the options. Either move to another surah completely, skip a verse, or go into a ruku'.
All of that stuff is good. Inshallah. That's excellent. Okay. The next question is, if someone dies on holiday abroad for whatever reason, should they be buried in that country? So this is like sort of, you are buried wherever you die, right? That's the kind of general principle. So if you're on holiday, it's not your country of residence, you're just passing through, spending a bit of time there, maybe enjoying the sun, and then coming back, but then something happens out there. I think that the message is all about sort of moving the juthas and the deceased from place to place.
Well, it's highly encouraged that a person is buried wherever they die. Wherever that may be, as long as there is a place, a Muslim sort of cemetery or a section of the cemetery that is specific for Muslims, then there's no harm in being buried anywhere really. The question might arise that how are people going to visit him? Well, you don't need to visit.
Your du'as reach.
Your du'a reach whatever you make them. The hukum in Sharia, I think it's disliked. It's not haram to sort of transport the body from one place to another. It's disliked. But generally, if a person dies abroad and you wanted to bring them back to the UK, it's going to take days on end, because you need first of all cause of death and what have you with the doctor. Once you have that, then you've got to get in touch with your embassy, and then the embassy has to process the application, and it takes days, and this is why it's makruh. It's because you are going to delay the burial, which is the right of that body. That body should be.
So there's nothing specific in the Sharia that talks about the hukmah of moving a body from place to place, and there have been many stories. I know the Shaykh al-Azhar as well, or the previous Shaykh al-Azhar, Shaykh al-Tabi rahimahullah. When he passed away in Riyadh, and it was a big thing. Obviously, we all heard about it when we were in Egypt, and they moved his body from Riyadh to Medina Munawwara, and he was buried there. And that was just sort of like the takreem and the Shaykh al-Azhar, sort of to honor him as the Shaykh al-Azhar. But anyway, the mas'ala arose then, the possibility of moving a body, and whilst that's not abroad, right? So you don't have any sort of embassy to deal with and stuff. It's just done everything internally. Right? But the distance between Riyadh and Medina is no small distance, right? It's quite a large distance, and that could be seen sort of, or that could be the same thing between one country and another with regards to the border. So you may die in Portugal, but then move to Spain, and the distance between the two is less than the distance between Riyadh and Medina, right? So the permissibility isn't necessarily with regards to the distance of the moving. It's just the delay that it causes with regards to burying the body, and that's where the nusus really are, isn't it? We have sort of explicit nusus from the Prophet ﷺ talking about how ajibu right? So to speed up the burial of the.
And that is the practice of Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in. A number of Sahaba, died in different expeditions, and Rasulullah would bury them there and not take them back to Medina.
Well, even Ansari is the most famous one, right? But,
many Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in. Yes.
Inshallah. So that's the summary, inshallah. That is, there is karaha in the moving of the body from one place to another. But it's
just because it delays.
Yeah, just because of the delay. But there's no hurma in it if someone does end up doing it. Inshallah. Okay. Let's have a look at the next question, Sheikh. What is permitted during Eddah that would not constitute end of Talaq? That would not constitute the end of Talaq. Let's understand this properly. I know that sexual intercourse is not, but is kissing, touching, and hugging okay? I don't know about you, Sheikh. Did you get that?
I didn't quite get the question, but I think I know what the questioner meant.
Yeah, we're going to assume that what constitutes the end. So, someone has pronounced talaq, and the iddah period officially starts. Let's say it's done in dhuhr and stuff like that, and all of the prerequisites have been met. And so the iddah begins, and what action constitutes the recommencing of the nikah?
So I think for this is very specific, and we would advise the person to get in touch with us, inshallah, via email, and we need to speak and to determine a few things before we can even answer the question, because we know that there are different types of divorces. If the divorce is baynura sughra, then there is no way of actually making rujur and going back into marriage without a nikah, right? If this is a talaq raj'i, then you can whilst the iddah period is going on, you know, the couple are still considered husband and wife, which means they can still decide to annul the divorce, or rather make up without having to do a new nikah. And for that there is a difference of opinion among scholars that should it be said in words first before any action is done, or if there is an action such as mentioned in the question, you know, hugging, kissing and things of that sort, does that automatically mean that the divorce is over and that the couple are back together? There is some differences of opinion, but I think the most, just to give a general answer, but you know, the person needs to ask as via email, inshallah, because we need to go through the specifics.
Sure.
Basically, in general terms, if a person has given his wife a divorce that is considered a raj'i divorce, meaning where he can take her back and the couple can be back in a nikah without having to renew and do a new contract, then most likely doing one of these things with the intention that I am taking my wife back would constitute a ruju', and you know, basically the iddah would come to an end and they would be considered married.
Yeah. So in my limited readings of it, right, so it becomes apparent that when it comes to this sort of stuff, there is obviously there is an active action that needs to be taken in order for it to be considered a return to the marital state. But there seems to be a sort of a blurred line between whether that is consensual or whether that is just one-sided. So whether that is the prerogative of the man. So obviously the behaviour of the nikah. So whether he decides to say, you know what, I have decided to take this marriage back. That's something that he intends without any knowledge of the woman, right? So that's where the line is blurred. Whether she needs to know that that's what he is intended by this, right? So he could do an action, like a hug or a kiss or something like that, and he may intend by it or he may not intend by it, right? So there needs to be that.
Well, if he doesn't intend by it to take his wife back, then he's committed a sin, actually a major sin. In relation to taking the wife back after divorce, it's the decision of the husband. But that does not mean that the wife has no input, right? So he should speak with her, he should make his intention known first and get agreement from her. But essentially, you know, even if she disagreed, he could take her back. However, he's not allowed to do that in order to harm her. Okay, so if he knows that there's still differences and we haven't solved the differences, then he's not, he wouldn't be advised to do that, because it's not going to change the situation, right? He's going to take her back, she's still in his nikah, but they're still going to have the same issues, and then probably it'll result in another divorce soon after the ruju', right? So a person can take his wife back if he has firm intention to make things work, they've talked things through, and he has an inclination that we can, fix the problems that have resulted in the divorce. Then there is no harm in that, and it's his decision. Even if the wife is in doubt, or perhaps even if the wife is disagreeing, he still has the right to take her back. However, if he does not think that they will be able to uphold a good relationship and the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fulfill each other's rights, then he shouldn't make that decision, because that would be harming her and extending the iddah period. Because if he takes her back, then he has to divorce her again, and then she's gone through half one iddah, and then she's going through another iddah. So, and actually in the Maliki madhab, we have that if a person takes his wife back only in order to harm her and to keep her hanging, then that ruju' is not even considered. But somebody has to make a decision for that. There has to be some sort of a qadi or a person of knowledge that makes a decision to cancel out that taking back the rujur, because he's only doing it in order to harm her, or he doesn't want her to get married, or things of that sort. And a person should not do that. A man should not do that, because this is playing with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and using them to your personal advantage against your wife or your ex-wife, and this will amount to zulm, injustice, and taking the verses or the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lightly, for which Allah Azza wa Jal warns that there is a severe punishment.
I had to disconnect your microphones. There was a lot of static noise. So it's coming through this.
Alright.
The air conditioning is cool.
Is it affecting, is it?
Yeah, so where I can turn that up?
Yeah,
I think he's left the cupboard open.
At the bottom.
Press that up. No.
Just bear with us, guys. So I know I said I like the cold. I've got the heating on because it's really cold in here.
Is this?
Yeah, I think that's the remote right here. So just turn it off. Or turn the fan down. So, oh sorry, yeah, that's the one. So it's not so loud. You can turn it up entirely.
That's better.
Okay guys, so if I at any point in this session get up and just leave the shop for a second, it's only because I've got to get my jacket because I'm really cold. SubhanAllah. One of those things where massages, mashallah, tend to be the hall's quite expansive and quite wide. And when the masjid isn't in use, obviously there's not many people here, so the heating doesn't get put on much. So this place can get really cold. Really, really cold, subhanAllah. So we're not actually sitting on these musallas just because, for appearances, where it's actually really cold.
Yeah. Usually your body's in here warming up.
SubhanAllah. Okay. So are we keeping the sound? Does it come closer,
now,
or?
I think it's better now. Even though we don't have the mics, it's coming through okay.
SubhanAllah. Alright. So let's move on to the next question, inshallah. What is it? When someone dies, what is the process from death to burial? Alhamdulillah, I am fine. I just want to be prepared. MashaAllah. Allah grant you a long life, inshallah, with siha and afiyah.
A couple of weeks ago, didn't it?
Yeah, I think there was a guy called Athar who asked that question as well, wasn't it? So Sheikh, do you want to give a sort of short summary about what happens between a person's death and their burial?
So, you mean about what happens to the soul?
What happens to the soul? Yeah.
Yeah.
Course, yeah.
What happens to the soul?
What happens to the body is you get washed and stuff.
Yeah. So
Let's
start with the body, right? Let's start with the body. What happens with the body is that the body is washed, shrouded, and then taken for Salatul Janaza and for burial immediately after, as soon as it is possible, practically possible. There are certain things, obviously, in law that are required, certain certificates and what have you, and that's important. Also, it's important to say here that it's good practice to have regular checkups with your GP, because if you haven't, like myself, if you haven't seen your GP in the last 4 years,
yes, mashallah.
What tends to happen is that when you die, it takes a longer period of time for the death certificate to come through, which delays the burial, and most probably in these cases there's a post-mortem. But if you have regular checkups with your, and I think the advice is every 6 months at least, health, general health checkup, blood test or something of that sort with your GP, then there is a record of your health, which means it reduces the time that it will take for the doctors to provide a certificate and then the coroner giving permission for the body to be transported. As for the soul, in a nutshell or summary, when it is time for a person's death, the angel of death appears. He has, most likely, according to different narrations, he has a'wan and assistant angels that work along with him. And then you have the angels of specific angels that come from paradise and angels that come from hellfire, right? So a large number of angels for every person that dies. And ulama say that the veil is removed at the point where a person is no longer able to speak. So when a person is no longer able to speak, and but you see that they are gazing at something, it is most likely that they are looking at the angel of death, angels of paradise, angels from hellfire who have come to take out the soul. And when they arrive, the first task is to start the extraction of the soul. The soul generally does not want to be separated from the body because it has been with the body for 50, 40, 60, 70, 80 years, however long this person has lived. And that is its comfort zone. So it doesn't want to leave. And secondly, it doesn't want to leave because it knows that it has to leave the dunya and go into akhirah. So there's a process of extracting the soul. It doesn't happen in moments. And this can take a few hours, perhaps even a few days, depending on the person and the situation they are in. And we know that life begins to... So think of it as your soul being your hand in a glove, right? So if you are removing the glove, your fingertips are the first things that are going to detach from the glove, right? And this is how the soul is extracted. The extraction starts from the toes, and the soul is pulled up out of the body. So we don't really know the Allah Azza wa Jal or Rasulullah have not informed us of the form of the soul, but it's most likely something that is of the size of your body, right? So the extraction begins and life begins to leave the feet, and this is why people who are experienced, who are called to see somebody who seems to be dying, the first thing they do is check their feet, right, to see whether their feet are still warm or cold. And then, the angels will work for, as we said, a considerable amount of time, trying to detach the soul from the body, which is very painful for the person who's dying. And according to hadith, that there are angels who are holding the person down. If it wasn't for that, then just the pain that is felt when the soul is being extracted would cause a person to run around trying to relieve the pain.
Is that what's meant by sakaratul maut?
Yes.
That's the sakaratul maut, right?
Yeah, the pangs of death. And it's made easier for some, and it's perhaps more difficult for others. And it's not, the pain that is felt is not connected to the body. So it may seem that, often people say, oh, this person died peacefully. There's no such thing as dying peacefully. There is an effect of the separation or a feeling of the separation of the soul from the body. But because the soul is something that is not tangible and not something that we can see, you're not going to see the effects of or the pain that you are going through, or the person who is dying.
Probably peaceful in a relative sense, in the sense that it's not a violent death. It's not something that's the body hasn't been.
But the soul is still suffering.
Still,
So to say they died peacefully in their sleep, and in comparison to the pain that is felt when the soul is being extracted, physical pain is nothing, because there are narrations that state the extraction of the soul is more painful than 100 swords being struck by 100 swords. So it's not something that is easy, and we have to be aware of that. And even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through it, and he would become unconscious and come back to consciousness, and all of this is due to the pain that is felt at the time. And he had a recipient of water by his side, and he'd put his hand in the water and then wipe it over his face and say, La ilaha illallah, inna lil mawti la sakarat. The pangs of death are real. And Aisha radiallahu anha says that after seeing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam suffer at the time of his death, I do not wish and I do not praise an easy death. Somebody that dies in their sleep. I don't think that's a good sign in any way, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through a difficult time. So then, once the soul reaches the حتى إذا بلغت الحلقوم, when it reaches the point, around the chest or the throat, then it is the angel of death who takes the soul out. Right? So the assistant angels, they do the work, and then he removes the soul, and that's perhaps because he has to, remove a number of souls at approximately the same time, and people are dying all over the world, and the angel of death is huge in size, and some hadith state that the whole world is like an egg before him. And that he looks at the face of every person 360 times a day, and he looks into every home 360 times a day. We're completely oblivious of this. And then as soon as the soul is taken out, immediately it is placed. So the way we shroud the body, the angels shroud the soul.
No way.
And the shroud is either from paradise, or it is from hellfire.
Talk a little bit about the soul sort of leaving the body. There are sort of hadith about the one who is righteous and pious and salih in this world.
Yes.
How the extraction is almost like water coming out of a glass, or and how the evildoer, his soul is almost like a wool being caught on thorns, being sort of ripped out.
Absolutely.
How does that relate to?
Okay, so that how does it relate to the painful experience of death? That the hadith. That is in relation to the last portion of the soul being extracted. So what happens is that the angel of death announces either that O righteous soul, come out to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it flows, because it realizes that there is no running away from this, and on top of that Allah is pleased with me. So it's really about the last moment where the soul is now going to be extracted or taken out.
With your righteous, so you're going to feel the sakarat al-maut.
Absolutely, and it's actually a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam states in a hadith that when a righteous person is leaving this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if they have committed sins for which they have not sought forgiveness, then Allah will put them through pain in order to expiate those sins and remove those sins, and those sins can be forgiven. And as for the disbeliever, at the time of their death, if they had done any good deed for which Allah did not repay them in this world, because we know that disbeliever does not get any reward in Akhirah, then Allah makes the extraction of the soul slightly easier for that person, in order for him not to have anything in the afterlife. And another amazing or a symptom of so the soul hears the call of the angel of death. Either it is يا أيها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي, that righteous soul, come out to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or the call is Ya ayyatuha al-nafsul khabitha, evil soul. And when that is said, then the soul does not want to leave, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذْ يَتَوَفَّى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْمَلَائِكَةُ يَضْرِبُونَ وُجُوهَهُمْ وَأَدْبَارَهُم, that it has to be beaten out of the body by angels. And then once the soul is out, it does not remain in the hand of the angel of death for a blink of an eye. Rasulullah says, immediately the angels of mercy or the angels of punishment take the soul, it is shrouded, and then the angels ascend with this soul. They come to the gates of the first heaven. If it is a righteous soul, permission is sought and permission is given, and this soul will ascend all the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or beyond the seventh heaven. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is a conversation between the soul and Allah Azza wa Jal, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks of the angels to take the soul back to earth, because I have made a promise that منها خلقناكم وفيها نعيدكم ومنها نخرجكم تارة أخرى, that you were created from soil and from the earth, and it is where you are going to be returned and where you are going to come out from. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the angels to take the soul back. The soul returns back and it remains by the body. If the body has not yet been washed and shrouded, then it stands there until it has been washed and shrouded, and then according to a narration, the soul slips between the body and the shroud, and then it is placed in the grave. Once it is placed in the grave, Munkar and Nakir come and ask questions. If a person answers those questions successfully, then a gate of paradise is opened up, a bedding from paradise is laid out, and clothing from paradise are given to that person. And then that person is asked to sleep and rest and await Judgment Day. As for the evil soul, it is shrouded in a shroud from hellfire. It is taken up for ascension, but permission is not granted at the first heaven, and then the angels let go of the soul, and actually the soul falls and returns to the body. And then the same thing, it awaits until the body is washed and shrouded, and then it enters into the grave. And the soul is alive throughout. And this is why Rasulullah states that when people are taking a righteous soul, it says, hurry up, because it knows that it's going to go to a resting place and await the Day of Judgment in that resting place and have a view of paradise. So it says, and according to some narrations, when you are carrying the body, people should be behind and the body should be at the front. And if it is an evil soul, then it calls out and it says, woe to me, where is it that you are taking me? So it doesn't, the life of the soul does not come to an end by dying. And then it is placed in the grave, and Munkar and Nakir, or the questioning angels, come and question the soul. And for the evil soul, a door is, or a window is opened, and that person is able to see their place in hellfire. And actually their punishment begins in the grave. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection. So these are some of the things we find in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in relation to death. There's a detailed hadith. I don't remember the Sahabi who is the narrator, but it's about Rasulullah going with the Sahaba to the janazah of a particular Sahabi who had died, and the grave had not yet been dug, and the Rasulullah then described these details in his sort of speech to Sahaba radiallahu anhu.
What a journey, eh? What a journey.
Yeah, and it's something that we have to think about and something that we have to visualize. And this is what Salihin would do. You know, they would lie down in the darkness and start to visualize these things, you know, despite not knowing what it would look like, but at least preparing yourself. So visualizing the approaching of the angel of death and the angels with him, you know, their sizes and their features, the angels of paradise, the angels of hellfire. You know, will you be fortunate to hear the call that is going to give you happiness and joy, the call of success, or am I going to hear the call of the people of hellfire? And going through these stages, and you know, how will it be when I enter my grave, and when I stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for judgment. So visualizing these things to make us realize that the things we fret about in our lives and we are so focused on don't really mean much when you put death, the life of the grave, and judgment and paradise and hellfire into the picture. You know, your problems are nothing. So having that focus is extremely important, and it has a way of relieving you of stress. You know, the thought of death, stress and anguish. And Rasulullah said, "Man ja'ala hammahu hamman wahidan kafahu Allahu hamman dunya wal akhirah." The one who is concerned about their akhirah, then Allah protects him from the anguish of this world and that of akhirah. Because then your problems, you know, they're still there, but they reduce in size, and they don't occupy your mind to the same extent.
Ajib, man. Deep, man, deep. Makes one sort of reassess their priorities in life, subhanAllah. Okay, let's, hopefully that answers the question. We've got a previous segment in one of the other episodes as well where we've answered this question. So if you didn't find what you were looking for in that answer, inshallah there's another answer that you can alternatively look for, inshallah. Okay, next question is, I have heard the Prophet ﷺ divorced women. Is this true? What is the difference between keeping a woman with bad behaviour and counselling her and getting rid of a woman with bad behaviour? So is it true that the Prophet
getting rid of her?
Commodities, isn't it? You know what I mean? I have this. Do I need it? Nah, I just like let's get rid of it.
Right, about the Rasulullah divorcing, there is no clear, strong hadith or narration, and I don't think it is the opinion of any of the ulama, except for, I believe, Sauda radiallahu anha. She had a feeling for one reason or another. I tried to research this, but I couldn't find any details.
Sure.
The Sahabiya, or the wife of Rasulullah who gave her day to Aisha, right? And ulama say that she thought that Rasulullah was going to divorce her. But they don't say that Rasulullah had any intention to divorce her. It's just a feeling that she had. And they don't delve into why she had that feeling. But no, Rasulullah did not pronounce talaq onto any of his wives. It was something that she assumed, and she said, "Ya Rasulullah, you know, I would like to remain your wife so that I can be your companion in paradise, and I give my day over to Aisha." So Rasulullah, my night over to Aisha. So Rasulullah accepted that, and this is where ulama say that, you know, a wife can give up her right if she wishes to do so. So, for example, mahar, you know, she can say to her husband, you know, I don't want mahar. She can say to her husband, I don't expect of you to provide for me financially if she has her own finance and she is wealthy.
Oh,
So Rasulullah
yeah.
accepted this, but this is not to mean that he did not see her, right? Because Rasulullah would see all of his wives at least once a day, either by visiting them all, and if he did not get the time to do that, then they would all gather in one place and have dinner with him. This was the practice of Rasulullah. So he still saw her and spent time with her, but she sacrificed the staying overnight and gave it to Aisha radiallahu anha, and Rasulullah accepted, and he said, if this is what you want, then I accept it.
Yeah, and it's more to do with sort of old age, isn't it, than anything else that versus all that.
In relation to at what point is it recommended to divorce, it's very clear. Allah Azza wa Jal says in a verse of the Quran, what is it, Sheikh? طلاق مرتان في إمساك بمعروف
وتصريح بإحسان.
إلا أن يخاف ألا يقيم حدود الله.
Right. Okay.
The limit is that when you fear that you can no longer fulfill your responsibility to this person, to your spouse, and this generally happens due to hatred, and hatred happens due to the way they have dealt with you. So if you have come to a point where you resent a person to the point that you cannot fulfill your responsibility to that person as a spouse. So for the husband providing, for the wife caring, then this is the point where Islam says you should divorce. But if you still have feelings for that person, or even if you don't have any you don't feel love, but you don't feel hate at the same time, and so you should try to, and you have an inclination that you can still maintain the basic requirements of fulfilling the basic requirements of marriage, then you should make an effort and an attempt to fix the situation. Just because divorce is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is harmful for the children, it's harmful for husband and wife, for their emotional well-being. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. What was the question again, Sheikh?
The Prophet divorces.
Yeah, so we dealt with that.
Yeah.
When is
a good time to? What is the difference between keeping a woman with bad behaviour and counselling her, and getting rid of a woman with bad behaviour?
Okay, so if the husband or the wife have bad character and you stay for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of the family and the children, then you are rewarded for it, and you are being patient, you are rewarded for it, and that is encouraged actually. Islam does not say, if your husband or your wife have bad character, you should leave them. But rather, if you can no longer work together and fulfill your responsibility as parents to your children and things like that, and there's a lot of fighting and arguing, this is the point where but if you can handle the bad behavior of your spouse, then stick with it as long as you can. Try to make a change by advising them and trying different approaches. If you advise them, if that doesn't work, try to get somebody that they respect and love to advise them. If that doesn't work, try to go to your local Imam. He will give some advice, and so on and so forth.
The steps that you can take basically before you get to that stage.
Bad behavior in itself is not a reason for divorce, unless, like I say, that bad those traits or that character causes you to then resent that person and not be able to fulfill your duty to him or her. But and then if you choose to divorce, then there is no blame on you. You are encouraged to stay in the marriage and work things out, and hope that your partner is going, or your spouse is going to change their behavior. But if you sort of say, she has bad behavior or he has bad behavior, and because of that I no longer want to stay in this marriage, you're not divorcing for no reason. Okay, it's a valid reason in Sharia that if a person is of bad character, it's a valid reason to ask for a woman to ask for a divorce and for a man to divorce his wife.
Allah. So just a quick shout out to Adnan and Ozzy, mashallah. A lot of people asking us questions about marriage and divorce. These guys are just sending their salams to us, mashallah.
Yeah, I think they're sending their salams and at the same time they're saying we're not married. Do something about it. Yeah.
Listen, you guys got called out there from I was only going to say wa alaikum salam.
We'll make dua for you, brothers. Inshallah. Yeah.
Sheikh, mashallah. Putting them on the spot there. Alright, so let's have a look at the next question, Sheikh. Try and plow through these because there's quite a few here. What is the main difference between Shias and Sunnis? How and when did the division occur? This is going back in the day now, subhanAllah, man. So, let's start with the precursor, Sheikh, right? So, the vast majority, what I found, right, of anything with a religious undertone that has led to some form of war or battle or civil strife between Muslims is always political in nature. It's never ever religious, right? It happened between the Sunnis and the Shia. The origin of that is Taqdeem Ali ala Abi Bakr, right? So who had more right to the Khilafah after the Prophet ﷺ died? Was it Ali radiallahu anhu or was it Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu? Inherently political, it's got nothing to do with the deen, right? And nobody's religiosity is going to be questioned whether they think Ali or Abu Bakr, right? At that time, right? Now, obviously, it's been highly politicized and there's a religious undertone to it. So if you take one side over another, there is definitely going to be some form of strife and conflict as a result of it with regards to people's religion. But in its essence, it's got nothing to do with, it's just an opinion, right? But obviously because of the factionism that was related to the situation. The same thing is the case with many other instances in the deen Shaykh. So another instance is between the Ash'ari and the Mu'tazila, right? In the time of Harun Rashid and Mu'tasim and these Khulafa. It was all about Kalamullah, Makhluq, Ghair Makhluq, right? A cosmological argument, right? A theological argument. That in and of itself shouldn't lead to anybody killing another, right? Because there's nothing from the Nusus of the Sharia that talk about Kalamullah being something that the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba spoke about, or told people not to speak about, right? But that led to
politicized.
Yeah, that was heavily politicized, and that led to a widespread strife between Ash'ari and Mu'tazila, right? And then there was this demonization of one group over another, right? For a period of time, at one point it was the Ash'ari that were the demons, and then after a decade or two, that turned into the Mu'tazila being demonized for some of their views and so on and so forth, right? And then there was all these other sort of intricacies at play with regards to the Aql and Naql and all this sort of stuff. This stuff is inherently religious in nature in terms of its undertone, but the division that came as a result of it and the strife that came as a result of it was heavily politicized. And this is the case with pretty much everything, right, in the deen. So same thing here in this situation. Sunnis and Shias at the beginning was just mere opinion, right? It was nothing to do with any religiosity. But then that turned into, and at the beginning, because it wasn't so heavily there wasn't that heavy an undertone of if you follow one side over another, that means you're my enemy. It wasn't as severe as that, although there was the seeds of that growing to the point where you had like people like Bukhari. Even in Bukhari right now, you have chains of narrators that the ulama of hadith will say that person has tashayyu in him, or he was from the Shia, meaning that not that he was a Shi'i in terms that he believed that there was 12 Imams and these Imams had knowledge of the dunya and the akhirah and the Lawh al-Mahfuz and all this other crazy nonsense, right? But in the sense that they had a preference for Ahlul Bayt or Ali radiallahu anhu or Abu Bakr. And that's kind of how it...
If you look at Sunni, is a person who follows the Sunnah and Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? Shi'i comes from the term Shia, which is group, a group. And the term is used in the Quran, Shi'an, how different people of different faiths broke down into different groups within those faiths. And basically the Shia are the group that was supportive of Ali radiallahu anhu and Ahlul Bayt to receive the Khilafah and be in charge of things after the passing away of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Fast forward, what happens is that initially it's just the preference, or and then whether it was those things were invented and lied about, or people witnessed some things which they believed them to be actions of injustice towards Ali radiallahu anhu, or rather towards Fatima radiallahu anha wa ardaha. This caused the Shia, the later Shia, not the first generations, but the later people of Tashayyu' have rejected the majority of Sahaba. And this is where you have a problem. And we're not talking about whether they're right or wrong and all of this. This is left to Allah Azza wa Jal, and this is actually not the... we're not qualified for this, right? To make a judgment on another person. I don't think anybody is qualified, actually. But we're just looking at the differences in practice. And why is there a difference in practice? So the people who are Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they say yes, absolutely. There was conflict between Sahaba, right? Between Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu anhuma, and Sahaba took sides. It was a political conflict. It had nothing to do with their companionship with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or their being udul and being people who are true to their faith and honest. So, they had a difference of opinion. There was conflict. We hold them in a position of regard and respect, and we actually say radiallahu anhum to all the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in. What happens then is that everything that is transmitted by any of the Sahaba, it's in the body of, in the work of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? So the volume of ahadith is far greater, because we are taking narrations from everyone. Those who are siding with Ali, those who are siding with Muawiyah, it doesn't matter. For example, Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu is known to have sided with Muawiyah radiallahu anhu in the conflict between Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu anhuma. But we still take his ahadith because he's a Sahabi. The fact that he had that understanding and he had to side with one of the two and he selected Muawiyah does not take anything away from him as a companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even at the end, and evidence of this is at the end of his life, he says that, there was a time where, I was against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If I had died, I would have gone to hellfire. Then there came a time where I was the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was the most beloved person to me, and I lived by his message. And if I had died in that time, I would have hoped to enter paradise. And then then we got involved in things after, where I do not know whether I have sided with the right party or and what the outcome would be. So he himself tells you that he's still in doubt at the time of his death whether he made the right or wrong decision. And Sahaba are human, and they can make wrong decisions, and it doesn't take anything away from them. So what has been transmitted to us from all the Sahaba, we have accepted as Sunnis or Ahlul Sunnah. Whereas with the people of Tashayyu' or the Shia, they have, because most of the Sahaba agreed to Abu Bakr being the Khalifa, they have discredited most of the Sahaba in different ways. Some of them say that they became kafir after the dying of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Others say they try to give an undertone that they are not so extreme in their belief, and they say, well, no, we don't consider them kafir, but we consider them munafiq. There's no actual difference, right? The kafir is in hellfire eternally. The munafiq is in hellfire eternally. Actually, the munafiq is far greater criminal than the kafir, right? And that is their position. Or rather, the majority of Shia, right? Because Shia in itself, like Sunnis, have different schools of thoughts. of thought, and some of them actually do not discredit Sahaba, and they do not insult Sahaba. This is where the danger lies in relation to whether a person is going to be considered a Muslim or not, is if they insult the Sahaba. If they don't insult the Sahaba and they say, well, we just think that Ali should have taken the position, absolutely, no problem. That is your thought. Although an entire nation of Sahaba accepted that Abu Bakr should have taken the Khilafah. But if that is your opinion, you're not taking anything away from either Abu Bakr or from Ali radiallahu anhu as companions of Rasulullah. You just think that Abu Ali should have been in that not such a bad position in comparison to insulting the Sahaba of Rasulullah and calling them kuffar or calling them munafiqeen. And hence, when you do that, you're left only with the immediate family of Rasulullah and a few Sahaba that did not get involved in this conflict whatsoever, right? That the Shia sort of still accept as companions, and their number, they're in the tens. Sahaba were 124,000 at the time of Hajjatul Wada, right? Some say 200,000 at the time of Hajjatul Wada that heard the speech of Rasulullah, saw Rasulullah in a state of Islam and died as Muslims. Out of them, you only have tens that you acknowledge as companions that did not leave the faith and did not become munafiq. So what happens is that what is transmitted by the majority of Sahaba, you are going to disregard. This is why the hadith of the people of Shia, the compilations of hadith, are totally different from the compilation of the people of Ahlul Sunnah, because they don't even accept all of those Sahaba. They say they're munafiq or kafir or whatever, but they don't accept them. Even if they hold a lesser opinion of them, they don't accept them. They say we will only take what the family of Rasulullah transmitted. Automatically what you've done, you've cut down perhaps 70% of hadith, and I've just taken this number out of thin air. But the transmissions of Sahaba, you've cut out. So you've got a body of a hadith, but it's much smaller in comparison. And that's where the differences in practice come, right? Between the people of Ahlul Sunnah and the people of Shia, is that they are working with different sources. The primary source, obviously Quran is the same, but in relation to hadith, they have a different body of transmission of a hadith, and because of that there's a difference of opinion, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all to the truth and to protect our
amazing how
iman
stuff
and our
evolves,
belief.
right, over time.
And my advice is for anyone who do not delve into this, because it is quite confusing, and if you read because the author has an impact on your thoughts, right?
There's very little benefit to this shit, man.
Yeah.
What are you getting into this for?
Exactly.
What do you want to get out of it?
That's it. There are people who have lived and died, and they have their goods and their bads, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge between them. And Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, "Tilka ummatun qad khalat." There is a nation or a generation that has lived and gone. لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم. They will be rewarded or punished in accordance to their deeds, and you are going to be rewarded and punished in accordance to yours. ولا تسألون عما كانوا يعملون, and you will not be questioned about what they did. So we are not going to be questioned about whether we sided with Ali or Abu Bakr or Muawiyah or all of this. We will not be questioned about that, but we will be questioned, why did we insult a companion? I always say that just from a logical perspective, that, and I don't want to, just for people to know, and perhaps to have this when they're conversating with Shias or people from Shia Islam, as it is called, that from a logical perspective, the people of Ahlul Sunnah say that the companions are intact in relation to belief and their companionship with Rasulullah, and some of them made mistakes, right? And it is for Allah to judge. The people of Shia say no, majority of Sahaba are munafiqeen or kuffar, and they have left the faith. So now think about it. The last messenger that was sent to mankind, who worked very hard and gathered 200,000 followers or 124,000 followers, and you say most of them have turned munafiq, what does it say about that messenger? He failed in his mission, right? And you can't use Nuh alayhi salam, because Nuh, only 83 people actually accepted the message. None of them turned back, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you've not only taken away Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, you've taken away from the esteem of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
That's like shit. That's like trying to find an excuse to actually get these people outside of the fold of Islam.
Yeah.
It's like,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's okay that these guys are kuffar because Nuh alayhi salam had few followers.
Yeah. But
What
doesn't make sense,
How are you using
right?
that?
And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that my nation is going to be the greatest nation on the day of Qiyamah. If you cancel out all of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, what are we left with? And then you cancel out all the Sunnis who are following that way, which is the majority of Islam. You are just, you know, just from a logical perspective, without delving into the details. And then on top of that, I say that if I stand before Allah Azza wa Jalla and He says to me, well, these people had a conflict and you did not side with the right party, I'll say, Allah, I wasn't there and I didn't know about it, and I chose to one party over the other, that Abu Bakr should have been the Khalifa, because that is what the majority of people chose in that time. I'm absolved of the responsibility because I have not made a wrong judgment about Ali. I still consider him an Imam, and I still consider him a Khalifa of Rasulullah. Imam meaning a leader in the knowledge, and still consider him the Khalifa of Rasulullah, the fourth Khalifa. It doesn't take anything away from him, right? But if I stand before Allah Azza wa Jal and He says, well, there was this conflict and you regarded all of these people as kafir and munafiq, and actually they were not, then you're in trouble. And I think tashayyu' really plays on emotions, unfortunately. People's emotions towards and love towards Fatima radiallahu anha and Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Hassan and Hussein, and we love them and we have the greatest respect for them. You know, Fatima is Sayyidatun Nisa'i Ahl Jannah, the best woman, she holds the best position in paradise, the leader of women of paradise. So we're not taking anything away from her, or from Al-Hasan al-Hussein radiyallahu ta'ala anhum aw ardahuma, or from Sayyidina Ali karramallahu wajhahu, by saying that Abu Bakr should have been the Khalifa and it was the right decision. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance and protection, and a person should not delve into these things because unless they are studying it, that's a different matter. If you're not studying it, don't delve into it. There's information that is much more important.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't know how to make wudu, you don't know how to rectify your salah.
But Abu Bakr and Ali.
And you're looking at Abu Bakr and Ali and...
To be fair, Sheikh, when looking into this, we read quite a few of the books that I read about this and about the seer and stuff like that. And a lot of it is conjecture, opinion of ulama. That is neither here nor there. Obviously, we will respect the ulama and their standing and you know their own sort of perspectives on what happened and what was correct and what wasn't correct and so on and so forth. So they all sort of touched on it. But at the end of the day, all you're going to come out with is either an opinion that agrees with one of those that has come before you, or you're going to come up with another opinion of your own. And at the end of the day, it's just going to be an opinion, and it's not going to matter neither here nor there to anybody else really. And it may, as you said, go against you on Qiyamah, which is the most important thing here.
And the thing with history is that there are so many accounts. You know, there's so many people who witnessed, and so many people who transmitted that information or the account of what happened. You know, Ali radiallahu anhu did not write it down. Muawiyah radiallahu anhu did not write it down. Abu Bakr did not write it down. It's people who witnessed these conflicts who wrote it down. So obviously there is going to be a bias in their writing, and they've taken one side against the other. Conjecture, like Sheikh saying, you know, they'll assume things, they'll probably even invent things to just support their claim, and that is why ulama say that even the seerah of Rasulullah, we don't take any ahkam from the seerah, right? We don't say Rasulullah did this, it says it in the book of seerah, this is why you have to, this is an obligation. You can't do that. You only take from the ahadith. The seerah is only transmission of what Sahaba witnessed with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
And it gives you
not
context.
and not all of it is 100% authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, on top of that, it's just sort of when you look at these things, you shouldn't look at it in terms of which side should I take, right? Which opinion should I follow? It's more of this was a stain in our history, and we need to learn from some of the things that took place at that time, and just better ourselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what's happened over the in the history of Islam, which is just as much a stain as the actual event itself, is the evolution of the chasm between parties and groups. They never found a way to get over, what their predecessors have done. And that's something that we need to learn from. We have to get over that. We have to look past that. And one of the ways of looking past it is not holding it in such a regard as we used to hold it. As in, like, this is what happened, and you have to say this, or you're not allowed to say that, and you have to side with this, and you have to side with that. It's like, no. You need to have a different perspective on it. Anyway, that subject can go on for a while. Next question, Sheikh, is to do with names. We all know about names, right? We discussed that last week as well, right? Names. So, one person's asking, is Noah, Noah, with the exact spelling and the exact pronunciation, I'm pronouncing it correctly, is that an acceptable Muslim name for a baby boy? Not because that the actual question is actually highlighting as well. They don't actually want to copy the sort of the Christian pronunciation or how you say it in Christendom. Rather, it is more to do with they just like the sound of the name, and because it's associated with a prophet. What's your?
It sounds good. It doesn't sound better than what Allah used in the Quran by saying Nuh in the Arabic language. But yeah, the name can be, if a person likes the sound of that name and they want to name their child that, absolutely, there's nothing wrong with it.
You as a person, Imam Osama, as a guy, as a person, wouldn't prefer that name, right?
Yeah, well, convince me otherwise. Allah says Nuh, and a surah of the Quran is named Nuh.
Yeah, but
right?
permissibility
in the
wise.
Arabic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they're just taken the name in the exact name in English.
Yeah. So the word that she used, the question you used was acceptable. So that's a bit different from permissible, right? There you go.
No. Like my
is that acceptable to your standards? No.
It has to be Nuh.
Yeah. All right. Is niqab fard? Short answer or long answer?
It's definitely legally fard now. Whether Islamically it's fard or not, you have to wear a face covering pretty much everywhere. Okay, so the most some say that it is not fard, and others say it is fard, an obligation. We know that Sahabiyat in the time of Rasulullah wore a niqab. We know that, right? Because Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the women to cover themselves and only leave the eyes in order to be able to see. That is his interpretation of one of the verses of the Quran, and that interpretation is a result of what he saw the Sahabiyat doing, right? Now, to say that all the Sahabiyat wore a niqab, I think that would be far-fetched, because we know that at times Sahabiyat came and conversated with the Rasulullah or even with the Khulafa. Like in the time of Rasulullah, you'd say, okay, this happened before the niqab was introduced, right? This is why Rasulullah recognized that person. People came and spoke to Abu Bakr and Umar, and women came and spoke to him, and he recognized them. Yeah. And it's far-fetched to sort of say, well, he recognized them because of their voice. Probably that not all Sahabiyat wore a niqab, and because of that, I think the middle path is to say that if a woman that is young and attractive should unmarried, should cover herself with niqab, ideally, in order not to protect herself from the fitna, and then on the other side, as a woman gets older, then the niqab is not as important because she will not be attracting attention or something of that sort. And there is something close to it in the Quran that when a woman gets old, then even the hijab, it's Allah Azza wa Jal puts it in a way that when a woman gets older, she can interact with men in a certain way, especially those who are much younger. And we have that in our culture, that you don't sit and talk to young women, strange women, but an elderly lady, you consider her as an aunt, and this is where it comes from.
Yeah.
So yeah, the summary is some consider it an obligation, others consider it not an obligation, but they still say if a person does it, it's good. It's recommended, strongly recommended if a woman is beautiful and attracts attention. And generally, a woman knows that about herself. When she goes out, she realizes that people are, or specifically men, are looking at her in a certain way. Then she should cover up if she can. We will not say it is an obligation. Just because there is that difference of opinion and that flexibility, but strongly and highly encouraged, absolutely. And then you have, a group of people who are saying that, it is only Arabian culture and it has nothing to do with Islam and it is not in the Quran. Absolutely, it is not in the Quran. Nobody can argue that. But, Rasulullah having a beard is not in the Quran. Right?
Subhanallah.
And other things are not in the Quran. Quran does not constitute does not include the details. It gives you a framework, and then the ahadith of Rasulullah and the statements of ulama is what is taken. So no classical scholar has considered niqab an invention or an innovation in Islam. No one discouraged it, right? But they spoke about whether it is an obligation or not. They accepted that it was there. It's in the culture. Sahabiya did it in the time of Rasulullah. Sahaba did in the time of Sahaba and the Khulafa. But then they said, is it an obligation? We don't find any ahadith where Rasulullah actually says and asks every woman to cover herself up. If anything, we find ahadith where we know that certain women were not covering up their faces in the time of Rasulullah. So because of that, there is the difference. But even those who say it's recommended, they say if a woman is not married, if she is beautiful and she will attract men's attention, then the encouragement level rises. So it goes from encouraged, something that is praiseworthy, to something that is necessary and highly encouraged, almost comes close to wajib, but I don't think it becomes an obligation. Allah.
That's more to do with sort of nusus that talk about interactions with the opposite sex, with regards to the fitna that attraction causes and that sort of thing. So it's not explicit in terms of the use of the niqab over not the use of the niqab, and that's where the istihbab or the recommendation comes from, as opposed to the actual niqab itself. Absolutely. So that's where the ideas of it being fard and not fard is kind of a bit obscure. So short answer, no, and long answer, what he said.
Okay. The last question?
Sure.
The the student loans thing came up last week as well.
Oh yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you please clarify the issue of student loan and whether there are cases where it is allowed? Jazakumullah khair. Here we go, Sheikh. Student loan. Student loan is a popular question among students, of course. Who else is it going to be popular with? So obviously we know Sheikh Haytham. He's like the spearhead with regards to its permissibility and the usage of it. He's found whether you agree with his opinion or not, his opinion is the way he's sort of.
It's a structured answer.
The way he's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
It's the way he's used the usul and the qawaid al-fiqh, and he's applied that to this particular instance. His view on it in terms of its permissibility is that it's not a standard loan where it's money on money, or you're taking money and you're returning more money back for that same amount, as a result of the time frame that's necessary. So it's not like for the time frame that is taken for you to pay back. That's what's accumulated and accrued over over that period. Rather, it's more like an investment, if anything else, in your profession. And the money that you get out as a result of you working from getting the skills that you've acquired for that particular profession, whether you work in that profession or not, you'll then pay back from the money that you get there, and inflation and other things are taken into account, and so there is this ballpark figure of what you're supposed to pay back.
But it's important to say that's about the amount that goes to the tuition, or rather to the fee that goes to the university.
Yeah.
And it's not about the maintenance fee, right? So the
So
student
the
loan
differentiation between the student loan and the maintenance
I
loan,
think
right?
there is, yeah.
And another intricacy is that it doesn't follow any conventional type loans where you're borrowing money and you have to pay back by a certain time, because there is a time frame stipulated where this
And a certain earning
written off, and you have to have achieved a certain threshold in order to pay the money back, and so on. So all these conditions and all these prerequisites, they kind of take it outside the realm of a conventional loan. So it doesn't, it may not, and it probably doesn't hold the same prohibitions with regards to money on money, and that's the way he's structured the argument. Very intricate and a lot more detailed than what I'm saying. This is just a sort of a brief summary. And since it's come out, however long ago, I don't know how many years ago that was quite a while back, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it's really taken off. It's been adopted quite widely. I don't know, Sheikh, how do you feel about that particular issue? Also, socio-economic norms as well. So we have obviously a demographic of Muslim youth that are obviously growing up here. There are more and more after each generation. I know in my generation, I'm second generation Muslim. Our kids' generation is probably more those who are younger than us, coming up way more than we were. And it was definitely a bone of contention when we were growing up and going to university. And so how do we balance all of that shit? What's your...
Yeah, well, I think, Sheikh Haytham, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him, he has looked into the matter in detail, and he has come up with this fatwa, considering it as due to its necessity as something that is halal, also because it is not like a conventional loan. However, it is still, it has to be said that the majority of scholarly opinion in the world would not agree with him on this, right? And there is still interest. The question is, can you take it or not? Right? Whether due to necessity it becomes permissible or not. I will not give a verdict, right? You have to look at the evidence that each, and most importantly, the evidence that Sheikh Haytham puts forward. And if you feel content that that is the right approach, and the correct conclusion has been drawn from the arguments he puts forward, then inshallah you take that opinion. There's no harm in that. However, I will say that education does not have to be university education. It doesn't have to be a degree. I don't like Islam discourages debts. Okay, as a way of life, it's not good. Ask anybody who's got a degree and wasn't able to get employment in the field that they studied for, and they are struggling to pay this loan, and it's on their mind, and they have to. And I've heard at least 2 people from our community who have had to do work long hours for a number of years in order to rid themselves of that. Just the thought that you've got the burden of the loan, and the Rasulullah would seek protection from the burden of the loan. So don't get into because this. What happens is that it's the beginning of a way of life, right? You take a loan, okay, it's necessity, permissible, no problem. You've taken a loan, you've gone to university.
Yeah.
Then
slope, isn't it?
No, then you've got to get a home.
Necessity.
Or necessity, take a mortgage out. So you've just done exactly what Allah doesn't want you to do, and you are in a position where you're working and you're basically just working to pay all of this, these loans, and you're enslaved almost. I think, and then because you don't have enough cash flow, you're paying off loans. It's not enough to meet, for you to fulfill your necessities and your needs. Get a credit card because it's a necessity. Yeah, I'm only going to do food shopping with it and what have you, and you're in debt, and you don't have that freedom. You can't leave your work, you can't change career paths, you can't venture into the unknown because you're so afraid about your who's going to pay the mortgage and who's going to pay the student loan, and you're just stuck and you're just miserable, and it's just and it's a system that is created in that way to ensure that people, Allah Alam, but in my eyes and the way I see it, you pay your taxes, you pay your loans, you pay your mortgage, you pay your credit card fee, and on the other end, your necessities are increasing all the time, right? So advertising, you need this and you need that, so you get more loans to get more things, and you're just caught in this. I strongly encourage brothers and sisters who are dealing with this question to think about it for themselves, and I ask parents to give the right guidance to their children. Now, if a young man or a young woman are doing particularly well in their studies, then absolutely we want those people to go ahead and get the education and get the degrees and put themselves in a position where they're going to benefit themselves, their families, their community, and the society in general, right? But if you're going to go to uni and come out with a 2-2 in some subject that everybody has a degree in, and you're not going to make a difference, why take a £50,000 loan?
She guilt tripping all the failures that. Listen, mate, if you're going to take a loan, you best get that first.
Exactly, yeah. You get a first or you get a 2-1, right? Work hard, because then you can explain why it's a necessity. But just to take the loan and barely.
Well, it was worth it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I might have taken a loan. There's doubtful with the permissibility of it or permissibility. There's certainly some opinion that it's not permissible. So it's like, okay, I've done that, but Alhamdulillah, I got a first from it, so I can justify it at least.
That it was a necessity for myself, and it is also a necessity for my community. Because I'm going to serve my community, and inshallah, it's going to be rewarding for you, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But if you're not so keen on studying, we need to remove this idea that a degree means
just going for the sake of going, right?
Things have changed. Yes, absolutely. A degree does what it shows that you have commitment, you have what it takes to take on challenges and what have you. But if you and it's really about the university experience is much more important in this day and age than the degree, right? Because only perhaps 30-40%. And I'm being generous, of people who are in university are going to come out with outstanding or good results. And
another specific Muslim community,
yeah. We're concerned about the Muslim community. We're not concerned about
Allah.
Allahu Alam. That is my feeling, and it raises questions about. Why does the minimum term for a degree, why is it 3 years? If it is, why is it 3 years? How, different subject matters, everybody has to do 3 years. It's more about the experience than about the knowledge that you are going to gain. So I honestly think that certain degrees, they're not even worth it. Right? They're not worth the time, they're not worth the
like a martial arts
I don't know. And you spend.
Sorry if anybody out there studying martial arts at uni.
and you spend all of that money, and then you're going to come out, and realistically, you're not going to get your chances of getting work in the field that you have studied are very slim because the opportunities are not as widely available.
So you
And
mentioned
that's why
Yeah.
I think it's important for parents and professionals in our community to give some advice to young people, because I think young people are made to start selecting at the age of 16. What do you know about the world? And what do you know about the employment market? And what do you know? And people come out with this like fancy idea, oh, this is what I want to do. Okay. And then they cancel out all of everything else and just focus on this. And then
isn't having like sort of aspirations and goals and stuff, isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't like
absolutely.
youth have that?
But your education is for what? Is to earn an income. Right? You're not here to if it happens to be something that you are very interested in and you enjoy, Alhamdulillah. But work is a necessity. Do you know what I mean? Just like going to the toilet is a necessity. You don't necessarily have to enjoy it. Right? Yeah, that is my take. That is my take on it. Actually,
Yes.
I think if you enjoy your work too much, you're in danger because you're going to become workaholic because you enjoy it, right? So you spend a lot of time. Your family is going to suffer. We have a culture of people divorcing because husband or wife are too committed to their work, right? You have a culture of people not getting married because they enjoy what they're doing and they don't want the responsibilities of children and what have
It's a
you.
little bit more nuanced than that, because this sort of work and stuff, there's purpose to your life with regards to your work. Some people that work in certain fields and stuff, they find fulfillment in completing their work and going through their work and stuff like that. So
If the work is a service to mankind,
yeah,
absolutely. Right?
that too as well.
I'm talking about if you aspire to be a football player. Like, what service is that?
Yeah.
That's just work, right? It's work. Okay, you enjoy it, good, no problem.
Yeah.
But don't make it out like you're living the dream.
Yeah, for sure.
And if anything, that's going to take you away from akhirah. We have a culture to live for work, where we're not supposed to live for work. We work to fulfill our necessity, right? And because our necessity is growing, we've added all of these things in our life. We have to work longer hours, or because we claim to enjoy our work so much and we have so much interest in it. Have interest in building your akhirah. You're working 8-hour shift on a daily basis, 5 times a week. How much do you give your akhirah, where you're going to live eternally? That work is to eat and drink and be comfortable in this world. It doesn't require all of that. I'm not saying don't work. I'm not saying don't aspire for a good career. I'm not saying that at all. But don't make it your focus. And that is what, one of the scholars said, people in the past worshipped idols, people today worship their jobs. And it's not even about money. Certain people, it's not even about money. It's that, they're interested by it and it's everything they live for and wow, and they can't wait.
Yeah, you've got to be well balanced. But let's say
Even when people introduce themselves, Sheikh, they introduce themselves with their professions now.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Osama and I am a doctor. Who cares?
Really? No.
I am doctor. Yeah?
Well, yeah, it is a bit of a status thing. But let's say, Sheikh, hypothetically, there is a balance, right? Someone has struck that balance, they've gone, they've studied. That hasn't been like the be all end all of their lives. They've gone to, mashallah, a good career in whatever.
Absolutely.
And they've managed to balance themselves as well. Does those same sort of perspectives apply to that person?
No.
Right?
No. We're talking about not letting the world and its fitna and its beauty take you away from akhirah. And one of the problems is sometimes this your aspiration in this world will cancel out or will take away time from your akhirah. And Rasulullah says, "Man ahabba akhiratahu adarra bidunyah." Right? The one who loves his akhirah will have to sacrifice some of his dunya, and the one who loves his dunya will have to sacrifice his akhirah. Then he says, give preference to that which will remain over that which will come to an end. So it's definitely about striking the balance. But going back to the question about the student loan and actually, people who go to university with a weak iman, with weak understanding of the principles of Sharia and go into degrees, human sciences such as sociology and
marginalizing the human.
No, I'm just saying. No, they are putting themselves in danger now, because this is not about 1 + 1 = 2. It's not about the human body. It's not about biology.
It's about what Jung thinks of.
You're talking about ideas and concepts and beliefs and this, that, and people go into it and they start doubting their faith, their religion. And I remember one of my teachers, who was a mufti, he said that in a congregation, which got him sacked, but anyway, that doesn't matter. And he's a highly qualified scholar. And this was like, I was a student, so 15 years ago. And he was warning parents that make sure your child, I'm not telling you don't let your child go for, higher education. I'm telling you, educate your children in the principles of their faith, so they know that this is a no-go area, this is a no-go zone, this is what I believe in. I'm never going to doubt this. And then I can explore what other people believe in. But when you have nothing, you have no basis yourself, and you go in and you're exploring all of these ideas and these creeds and different... Because there is nothing there, anything can come and set itself. And then you have and this is a major problem in our community. People are leaving Islam, and it's not 45, 50-year-old people who are turning around saying, well, actually,
after 14, 50 years of thinking,
agnostic. No, it's this younger generation that is going into education without the basis. This is the problem. The problem is not with the education, is how you're going into it. Are you convinced about your faith and your belief? If you are, Alhamdulillah, you can go into any field and it does not matter. But if you don't have the basis, then you need to...
For real. So going back to the student loan stuff, Sheikh, just maybe finish off with this. You mentioned it's the responsibility of parents and others in the community to guide and to instruct and that sort of thing when it comes to this sort of stuff. And obviously having a background and a foundation in the deen is always going to help with regards to when they're going to be learning, and especially when they're going to be in environments where there's going to be conflict between their iman and what they see in reality, right? But with regards to the loans in and of themselves, the financial structure of things, isn't it for, mashallah, we've been in this country for a while now, we've been in here for generations, alhamdulillah, there are certain sort of Muslims that have done extremely well for themselves. And they've done extremely well in the financial sector as well. So with their financial prowess and their know-how and their understanding, isn't there a responsibility on these particular people, right? I know people look at the Imams like, Sheikh, what are you doing? But if I had knowledge of the financial sector and I had bundles of cash at my disposal, he certainly would create some sort of system that allows the support for Muslims to undertake their education without having this shubha of whether a loan is permissible or not permissible. And you know what I mean? There's financial outlets that allow them to do these things in a perfectly halal way without having that sort of that burden of guilt that I've done this out of necessity and I'm doing it for you have to justify your position with education. That should never be the case, but you've got to justify yourself with learning. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Whatever the subject is, obviously, having that foundation and stuff like that you're talking about, but learning is a حكمة ضالة المؤمن فإنما وجدها فهو أولى بها. Right? The wisdom and knowledge is what a Muslim is seeking and searching for. Wherever he finds it, he should take it. Right? So
it's unfortunate that we've been here for so long and we still have the same problems, like you said. In your days, people were facing this, and 20 years later, people are still facing the same question. And that is because we're living as individuals and we're not really mobilizing our resources as a community. And we hope that some people will do it. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala.
So here's a call for you guys. Anybody in the financial sector, get in touch.
Going back to the question, to summarize our answer is you have the option of taking Sheikh Haytham's, which is a valid opinion. Although it is not the majority opinion, that would make it completely permissible with no questions whatsoever. Or You can take it out of necessity. That is, because your parents cannot support your education, and you feel that you will do well in your education, and you are going to, and then you can take the loan, and inshallah Azza wa Jal, it will be due to the necessity, it will be permissible for you to do that. But no, what we said is not about whether something is permissible or not permissible, but we were talking in general about once you've taken that responsibility on yourself, then try to get somewhere, right? Study. Don't take a loan and just waste 3 years
Do something like
and
that.
come out with. If that is your intention, and you know that you don't have the discipline to study hard and what have you, then perhaps the degree is not good for you. Or maybe look for something that is there is scholarships, there are degrees that are funded by the state. There are other options that are available out there.
Sure, mashallah. Okay, and with that, I think we'll call it a day. Shout out to all of the brothers and sisters that sent a question in, that commented, that gave their salams and sent their love. Mashallah, we feel that love all day, every day. Inshallah, we will be back next week, inshallah, for another installment of Ask the Imam. Inshallah, of course, like